Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Blues and Jazz Dance Book Club live lecture with Fen Kennedy. We're happy to be doing an event on the book Jazz Dance by Jean and Marshall Stearns and having both a lecture portion and
lecture with Fen Kennedy.
Get
We're
out
happy
and dance.
to be doing an event on the book Jazz Dance by Jean and Marshall Stearns and having both a lecture portion.
Alrighty, sorry, I had the second portion up of this, so it's gonna like echo. But we're going to turn the time over to Fen to introduce themselves and to get started on the lecture. So go ahead, Fen.
Hi, everyone. For those of you joining me, I'm in the lobby of the Barnett Theatre at Ohio State University. I'm Fen Kennedy. I'm here in Columbus, Ohio, where I'm getting a PhD in dance. I'm really excited to be talking to you about Jazz Dance, the book. This book has been part of my life for a while. In the back of it, there's a section, if you have it in front of you, where there's a lot of blabber notation. This is a language of writing down dance like you would score music that I have been studying since 2008, wow, nearly 10 years. And when it became known in the blues community that I could do this, I was asked many times, will you reconstruct the notation from the Jazz Dance book? And it was always too much of a project until I joined the PhD and I had time. And now I've been slowly reconstructing the notation and the history, and I give lectures on the era that's covered in this book. So I'm delighted to be talking to you today. Jazz Dance, I don't know if all of you have read the book, or if some of you have skimmed it, or what you've done with it. But it's an overview of different jazz dances and vernacular American dances, as well as the associated practitioners, the different historical periods, and it's organized thematically, not chronologically, which is a point that I'll get into in just a moment. Some of my favorite things about this book is that it really deals with the different historical tracks of vernacular and jazz dancing in ways that we as social dancers, and I'm assuming a lot of social dancers, can often lose. It juxtaposes black and white experiences, touring performance with stage performances, social and stage dance, blackness and whiteness, and it manages to tie them all together into a picture that's looser than maybe you would find it if you looked at it from one context, but actually gives us an idea of the complexity of all the different things that were going on at the time. The fact that it is thematically organized, not chronological, means that we're having to work a little bit harder to read it than we might if we were reading like a standard history book, because rather than a story that follows one line, we've got many lines going along and we're jumping back and forwards in time, and it makes us think a little more about getting to grips with the different perspectives on the dances that are being covered. For social dances in particular, I love it because it talks so much about the relevance of tap. I've been a tap dancer since I was like teeny tiny, and I always think that it's something we're sort of missing in social dance, how vernacular social jazz dancers and tap dancers kind of grew up alongside each other, and at some points were integrated in ways that we don't integrate them now. So like having chances to bring that forward and talk about it in the context of the dance that we do is really, really great. Over the course of the lecture, what I want to do is I want to first talk about like the historicity and the place and time of the book itself, like what it means to have this thing in front of us as a book and where it's come from. I want to go a little deeper into some of the legal and social and performative contexts that are coming up from some of the broader research that I do. I'll take some questions, I'll take some discussion, and then we'll actually get up and I'll do in real time what I do with the notation, which is I'll restage some vernacular dancings. If this sounds like a good plan and I can see your faces, please wave. Fantastic. I have an array of waving and thumbs up. Great. I'm going to grab water too. This is not like giving a class at all. I'm talking to a little black eye that's about 2 meters in front of me, and I'm used to like 40 faces. If I start going really fast, somebody like wave at me to slow down. So, Marshall and Jean Stearns, Jazz Dance. It was written through the 60s. It was actually published posthumously in 1968, which is like, it's in the thick of the Civil Rights era. The Civil Rights Act has just been passed, which means there's a lot of complexity in the national mindset about the relation between blackness and whiteness and the place of blackness in society. And you can see these really conflicted attitudes in kind of the drive of the book. Like the Stearns, they really want to talk about having achieved equality, because that's in the national discourse in the 1960s, like legally, blackness and whiteness are equal. Looking back on it now, we know that like that wasn't so much the case, neither legally nor socially. But there was a kind of celebratory mindset. At the same time, a lot of the kind of social racism that was still prevalent at that time is still going on in the book. And we'll see that as we like talk through some of the case studies. So there's conflict in their own attitudes coming up, and there's also this drive to kind of give everything a happy ending, and say everything's okay, that we should kind of be aware of as we're reading through. The other thing that's going on in the 1960s academically is there's a real shift in like how we talk about cultures that aren't our own. And Marshall Stearns is a Harvard academic from a family of university professors. So he comes out of like university practices of anthropology and ethnography. And we're starting to see a shift in the 1960s from what's called armchair ethnography, which is where you sit in a chair and you read books about other cultures. Hi, Catherine. Sorry, Catherine's face has just appeared. Where you read books that other people have written about other cultures, and you summarize all these books into your own content without ever actually going and seeing the places. To methods like oral histories, like participant observation, actually going and spending time with the people you're actually writing about, which is a step back again from what we try and do now, which is to get people who live within cultures to write their own narratives. Sorry, Catherine's face just got really big on my screen. Would you mind muting your microphone, Catherine? Thank you. Okay, so Marshall Stearns had like a lot of experience from within jazz dance culture. He was a drummer, he was a musician, he lectured about jazz and musicality during the 1950s, had gone on tour with Dizzy Gillespie, and in 1956 he was actually employed as a cultural diplomat to go to Russia and to kind of take jazz out into the world as his profession. So he has a lot of like circulation within jazz dance culture as an insider, which gives him an interesting perspective to write from. And I think one of the things that really comes out through that in the book is he's able to call the dances the things that people doing them are calling them. Which comes, like, if you look at he's able to go like, okay, there's a phenomenon that we call jigging, but really a lot of people are calling jigging because they couldn't differentiate black dance from Irish jig dancing, and what often was going on was a combination of tap influences and buck and wing dances and something that black dancers themselves were calling jigging. And his ability to pass that out for us is really clear, which I love. At the same time, we can see like white academic privilege in his background. And a place that shows up in what we're reading is how many times, I wonder if you picked up when he read the book, was he saying that black dancers were happy to perform for no money because they were just culturally happy performing. Especially in medicine shows and vaudeville shows and Southern touring performances, which kind of feeds directly into Jim Crow literature and the idea that black bodies are happy so long as there is music, rather than them being people who need like food and support and structures around them. Where am I saying? One of the I'm talking about Jim Crow, so I'm going to talk about like a phenomenon that's splitting the North and South at the time. Well, just in the time the book was being written, not exactly when the book was published. And it's important differentiation when we get to talking into copyright. And that's the difference between like de jure segregation and de facto segregation. In the South, we have, until 1964, we have segregation that is mandatory by law, and it's embedded into policed structures. Whereas in the North, segregation is not in the law, it's enforced socially by stigma and community action, which means we've got segregation in the North and the South of the country, but they're functioning in very different ways. So when they talk about the Great Migration or about like wage debates, depending on whether you're in the North or the South of the country, that's going to take a really different shape. Just a minute. Okay, I'm keeping this there now. Okay, so one of these, some of the conflicting attitudes that comes out that's very much tied to white attitudes to blackness is the kind of sexuality and sex shaming that keeps cropping up in the book. Because Marshall Stearns, he doesn't know how to talk about hips. Like, he really likes hips. He likes the way they move, he thinks they're fantastic. He calls them Congo hips a lot because I think he wants to legitimize hip movement as coming from African dance traditions. He also feels really strongly that a lot of hip movement is somehow other than white morality. And like you can see it through the book, it's like these women wouldn't describe the hip movements of this dance because it would have made them blush. I won't repeat what this dance looks like because it wouldn't be proper for my readers. So in some ways he's imposing his own moral perspective on what these hip movements that he's correctly identified as coming from a long dance tradition. And he's also realizing how they read within white culture. And the poor dude was so conflicted writing this book. I he's trying so hard, and he really doesn't know what line to draw. And watching him navigate that is really fascinating. But this idea that like black bodies were more sexually promiscuous than white bodies is a really common trope in like racial narratives that were being constructed at the time, because there was this idea that if some races or cultures or genders were less able to control themselves than others, then that justified the need for external control. Like the imposition of structure on these dances and the imposition of white movement norms on these dances was justified because there was this ethnographic and anthropological narrative that said that that was what was necessary. And if you look at dances, there's a really wonderful clip on YouTube from 1903 of the cakewalk Infernal. It's a Parisian vaudeville show, and the basis of this little sketch is that the devil has fallen in love with the cakewalk because finally people are doing the devil's dance. And he comes out, he's got his little horns, he's got his little hat, and he does a cakewalk. So the kinds of associations that are being made with these dances in different popular cultures are tying into these racialized narratives of whiteness and blackness. Where am I? Oh, yeah. When we're starting to talk about like gender and black bodies, there's a human who's really missing from this book, and I don't understand why she's not in this book, and it's Josephine Baker. Like, she is for someone who's done a really good job of like spotlighting and highlighting and giving oral history from really major figures in vernacular dance, like Josephine Baker is shockingly absent. And I can only guess, but my guess would be that he's minimizing a female solo performer because again, she ties into this like white uncertainty and white fear of black bodies and black sexuality and black female sexuality in particular. And this gets us to the question that we like have to pay attention to all the way through this book. It's like, what did the Stearns have access to? Like, what were they able to research because of who they were, because they were white academics? Like, what did they get to be allowed to see? And then what have they made the decision to give us? And how are they presenting those stories? And when we read books like this, like, it's really important to start thinking about that as we go, and like, what stories are we being told and why are we being told them? They are like, they're not 21st century critical theorists. They don't have like the academic structure that says you should talk about your position in relation to the people you're studying, that we maybe do now. So it's kind of our job when we go through as blues researchers to be able to do that for them, especially when we're trying to like, reconstruct the dances, because we have to say like, okay, what do they mean by Congo hips? Why aren't we being given a description of them? We have to assume that in these descriptions, like, there's variation and difference that maybe the Stearns weren't able to pass out. So what other sources do we go to, and what do we explore when we're trying to decide like what these dances are? There's also, I beg your pardon, I just blanked. What the stories are. This is why I have notes. Oh, yes. There's also like certain contexts of performance, like the Stearns are not going to be able to go to, like rent parties are not a thing that's going to come into this book, because like that's an in-group Black cultural practice that they're not going and studying. They're mostly looking at people who've in some way circulated in a performative context. Like they're going out and they're making dance in public spaces. And that shows up, I'll talk about this later, but in the notation that shows up a lot, because what the Stearns have frequently notated is the white version as it's got onto stages of the Black dancers, which means that, again, conflicting. I think it's a great source. I also think it's a very dodgy source. And if you can hold that balance of great and dodgy in your mind, like that's kind of what this book teaches us about like researching historical Black dancers in particular. Wow, time is going really quickly. I'm going to talk a little faster. I wanted to talk about a couple of things that are happening in the dance world around this book. That are like become really interesting sidelines and back up some of the Stearns' research. So in 1900 to 1910 in particular, if you look at newspaper articles about dance, both social dances in ballrooms to jazz music and certain kinds of concert dances are being called modern. Because at the time, what modern means is like of the now. And then mid-1920s all the way, like from that point, like people start to want a philosophy of modernism and like what modern dance is as like an artistic movement. And social dance falls completely out the picture, and Black dance falls completely out the picture, because people start tying in like Whitman and Nietzsche and Haeckel and Baudelaire and Virginia Woolf, and they're tying into painting, they're tying into writing, and they're looking for like the really real, like the depths of the human soul and how you express it. And they're looking for an American way of doing that that's kind of free of European influences, because America is nation building in the middle of the world wars. And given the really complicated attitude of whiteness to Blackness, what happens is that like white women in the 1920s and 30s get framed as this blank slate, and as the perfect place to explore the really real. So you have choreographers like Helen Tamaris, who are white choreographers, performing Negro spirituals, because white women, especially communist white women or communist Jewish women, who say, like, we're oppressed by our class, we're oppressed by our gender, we know what it's like to be Black. And there's a massive trend at this time of white choreographers portraying the Black experience, and newspaper critics are flocking to see these white women because they bring dance into the philosophy of modernism. Versus the Black dancers who get caught in this incredible catch-22 of being told to, like, be your essential self, by which critics mean, like, dance African dances, don't dance concert dances, versus what you're doing is ethnic dance, it's not artistic. And they're stuck in this endless loop of not really being able to be witnessed as performers of the present moment, making art. And when they perform the things that will get seen, it gets labeled as it's folk, it's ethnic, it's the discourse of the past and it's the discourse of other countries rather than like what is going on now. And it's the same thing that you hear in Stearns when the Stearnses say that like white performers in blackface were considered more real performing in minstrel shows than Black performers. It's because they were considered more adept at, well, one of the reasons is that they were considered more adept at portraying like the reality or the stereotype of that experience. Like they were considered just have a better grasp of what those things meant for white audiences. Skipping on. The other thing, there are many other things, I'll say that so many times. Where this becomes really interesting, in the Stearns book, I think they write about the chocolate dandies. And the chocolate dandies in 1924 became a really interesting case for like the humanity of the Black body under the law. Because one of the performers, his name was Johnny Hudgens, he left the show and he contracted elsewhere, claiming breach of contract by the show's producers. The white producers said that they had been cheated out of labor, that Hudgens was irreplaceable, that there were no other performers like him, and therefore he was obligated to come back and keep performing to sustain the show, because otherwise the show would go on. Hudgens ended up winning the case, but only on the basis of the argument that he was just another Black dancer, he was really easily replaced, like all Black dancers were pulling from the same kind of folk skill set, that there wasn't anything actually extraordinary he could do. And he used the racist rhetoric of the time to protect himself from the producer's claims to his labor. And then he kind of beat the system again, because then his next interaction recorded with the law is he copyrighted his performances. And said, like, my routines are unique, they're my creative content, like, they are stuff that I have produced as an artist and no one else should be allowed to perform them. And he actually wins that case as well. So there's this negotiation going on in the law about, like, Black people's right to their own time and labor and creative output. There's also, of course, like, other systems of socially managed copyright going on. It talks in here about like Bojangles Robinson and how he was really, really protective of his stair dance. And there's a lot of stories about him calling up and threatening performers if they performed a stair dance. What I didn't know is that Cholly and Atkins, who are also in the book, they actually sent him a check for $1,500, and they said, this is in part payment for the chair dance that we stole from you. So you've got this idea, like, as Black dancers come up through the performance system, they take these steps both socially and legally to protect the validity of their artistic labor, like their art as individuals, rather than just falling into the rhetoric of we are Black performers, which is often what white producers wanted to impose on them. Do I want to go there? No, because I'm running out of time and I have a couple of other things to get to. If there are more questions, I'll go back to things. The place of tap in all of this, because I promised you I was going to talk about tap. tap's a really interesting phenomenon because it falls into like the rhetorical gap that's being created in this moment, because because it's like coming out of Black dance context, it's considered entertainment rather than art. It's not really a social form, but it's also not really a solo form. And people don't quite not know what to do with it, which is why I think it kind of gets lost, because people aren't quite willing to validate the Black performers who are performing it at the heights of its virtuosity as artists. And yet what they're doing can't quite be translated into mass entertainment, which is why when it gets onto, like, when tap gets onto Broadway stages, and they talk about Buddy Bradley having to massively simplify his routines and his musicality for white performers, so it becomes mass entertainment. It becomes repeatable, it becomes something people do in unison as backdrop, and it kind of loses its status as like a solo improvised art form. They say in this book that tap dance has kind of died. If you look at like what's happening now, you've got people like Colin Dunn, who comes out of a more Irish tradition. You've got Sabian Glover, who comes out of a more Buck tradition. And tap has really come back. In fact, like some of the things that I was reading about, I was like, oh my goodness, I know how to do this. I could do 3-beat wings. I can't do 5-beat wings. That would be extraordinary. And there's similarities in the training that are happening now. What's fascinating is that in the UK, it comes from the more like class act, upright posture, light on your feet kind of thing. And in the US, as far as I understand it, it comes from the more like athletic buck dance rhythmic traditions, which means me tap dancing in America is really, really weird, because it's like, I know this form, I don't know what it's doing over here. And that happens a lot. I've also started trying to integrate it into social dancing, particularly into Charleston, to see like, and also into Delta blues, to see how like that rhythmic and footwork play is like, it's present, but it's not quite present, and I don't know quite what it's doing. But like, if anyone wants to geek out about tap with me, that's always a thing I'm down for. The big story of this book, and the thing that I know Chelsea was really excited for me to talk about, was appropriation, which I'm sure most of you have met this word, but appropriation is when a social or cultural group who are higher or more powerful in a cultural hegemony takes the symbols or movement or work or products or like aesthetic of a group that is lower in the hegemony and adopts it for their own without necessarily crediting it or taking it or appreciating what it means. When we start researching these kinds of dances, like one of the questions that I ask myself when I kind of look for videos of Black dance is like, who is filming who? Like, where is the camera and who is behind the camera and what is the camera being pointed at? Are there certain dances the camera is not being pointed at? Like, absolutely, yes. Are the films being shown, are the dances being shown in and out of context? Because like, I love the spirit moves, but everything's done on like a white photo backdrop, and you can't see like, is this a street dance? Is this a ballroom dance? Is this a dance in somebody's living room dance? And we don't often get that information. The other thing I will urge people to be cautious of if they're going and they're watching these dances is that cameras at the time were hand cranked. And if you went too fast on the camera, everything looks in slow motion. And if you went too slow with the crank, everything looks in fast motion, which is why a lot of these old films look really, really speeded up, which gives them like a strange sense of like the motion and the weight transfer of what they actually are. There's also a nasty trend of people dubbing sound over older videos, which means we don't always have like accurate music in context. We're talking in these dances about like white dancers, and the biggest culprits were Vernon and Irene Castle, but taking over Black and Latinx dancers. And I'm starting to like, as I look at this more and more, I'm starting to pass appropriation out into two stages. And we have the initial stage, which gets talked about a lot, where things shift into a male-female partner dynamic from either solo or communal concepts. The posture becomes more upright. the connection is more formalized. There's an addition of tone to the frame, mostly. It becomes a taught form, by which I mean like the steps are codified and translated into geometric spatial patterns rather than an internal kinesthetic or connection-based dance. And all the sex gets taken out. And then stage 2, which is kind of like once these dances are more established as social practices, is that they start like the trajectory of like performed dances and the trajectory of social dances has started to come back together. And the stage stereotypes of dancers, the dramatic dips, the lifts, the exaggerated costuming, that starts to come back into these dances. You see, you can see it particularly if you've ever gone and watched dance sport and you've watched them like doing a tango, or you've watched like ballroom dance versions of salsa or swing. Like you can see like this really exaggerated staged performative body coming back into it. So there's a giant emphasis on the visual, and I'd argue that like there's still a big emphasis on the visual in social dance, particularly when we start competing, rather than like an internal partnership-based focus. The other thing that I'm really interested is that like in like 1950s and 60s white social dancing, and also in the Black vernacular dances that preceded it, and when I'm rubbing here, like I'm touching the Stearns book to say this is something in the book. I should mention that. I don't just like to scratch the chair. You see a lot of routines, like you see a lot of like steps that are linked together to form the identity of dance, like the black bottom, like the buzzard lope. And we don't really anymore have routines of steps and words linked to them that we teach as dancers. Yes, the shim sham, yes, the Madison, but not something like walling the jack. That's a short thing that gets repeated as a social dance. And there's also, I think, like the stereotypes of hypersexualization come back in. So where in like, if you're looking at like white dancing in the 30s and 40s, there's a very sexist attitude to it. I think as we look at like social dances as they've come through into like the 90s and the now, like we want to put the sex back in and we don't always know how to do it. And sometimes like we're thinking about like white created stereotypes of other bodies' sexuality when we think about like what sex means in our social dancing. And that kind of gets us onto the realm of the now, and when I've kind of left the book behind. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop and I'm going to take some questions from people, if this seems like a good time. I'm going to drink some water and put my notes down. And I think what's going to happen is you give your questions to Chelsea and she's going to give them to me.
Yeah, so what I'd like you to do is if you have a question, and I'm hoping all of you have a question, let me know in the group chat that you have a question, and then I'll announce who's going to ask a question. You unmute your mic, ask it, and then remute your mic to hear the answer. So opening it for questions. We want to get to like the dancing part as well, so rather than like wait forever to ask your question, jump right in.
And I'm just going to say it.
All right, Amy is going to ask a question.
Great.
Cool. Hey, thanks so much. It's been really interesting. One thing that I am curious about, if you have kind of context for, and maybe how this is relevant to the routines that you were just talking about, in my experience learning about some of the dances that are kind of more modernly done in the Black community in New Orleans, in that area, some of what I've heard is that it's about the DJ or the musician who's leading actually calling out what's going to be done, and then the dancers are responding to that. so that there are maybe routines that kind of get repeated, but not necessarily done in a codified, it's exactly this one following this one, but that there is kind of some thing to that. And I'm curious if you have any sense of how that existed in the past, right? And how that's relevant maybe to the routines that are a part of what got kind of codified, because like, oh, you did it once, now it must be a thing that you do.
Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm just giggling because I'm realizing as you say that yes, routines do exist in like music culture, because in my head now all I can sing is watch me whip, watch me nay nay. And it's a routine, and we know those things happen one after the other, and I'm sure other people can give you more examples. But yes, I would say that like, this is not an area I'm an expert in, but yes, I do believe that those things existed certainly in vernacular dance contexts of like square dances and ceilidhs, like the tradition of like a caller. And I know that's a very white phenomenon, but in black dances, if we're looking at something like, again, the buzzer globe, you've got a song that has like a lyric and then an action associated with that lyric that wouldn't necessarily be recorded, that could be sung. And I am sure that like someone who knows that music better would be able to give you lots of different examples of like, especially associated with songs, like routines of movement that were communally known. Oh, but you were asking about ones that like were prompted by. I guess I definitely see it in like, again, it definitely happens in the music, like band leaders directing solos and making improvisations like around known structures, but that vary from time to time and that are constructed in the moment. I could not tell you if that was a practice in dance.
It sounds like also in this context, it might be in places that weren't available to the Stearns to actually observe.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alrighty, so do we have another question? So I actually am curious, getting like a discussion started. I loved your discussion on appropriation, and I mean on how these dances mold, and particularly how you utilize tap to explore Delta blues. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little more about how we can look at this history and like utilize it to mold our own social dancing. Since I think we're all dancers here, it would be very interesting to hear how we can like honor this history and deal with it in a realistic manner, since this is sociology. And like you said, we've got to deal with this, like, what lens are we looking through? We're looking through a white lens with very certain like cultural expectations. So how we can like get through that and look at more what this was and how we can integrate it into our own dancing.
Yeah. For me, how this shows up is like, I think about who I'm being on the social dance floor and what I'm doing. I think since I started to get really deeply into the historical research side of this, I'm a much more chilled out dancer now. I tend to steer less. I can see the people who's smiling, who I've got like years-long dance associations with. I promise, guys, I chilled out. Like, I tend to do less. Like do less with my body and connect with my partner more. I tend to like think about the influences I'm drawing on, particularly when I social dance, because I have other dance languages available to me. And like, whereas when I was a newer dancer, I wouldn't have worried about, oh, I can do this thing from ballet and it feels great in this moment. Like, I'm a little smarter now about, yes, I could do this thing from ballet, but it would come like, it would change my posture, it would change how I connect to the ground, it would change like how I'm hearing the music. So what could I do instead? And I try and like keep that awareness with myself in the moment of like, which bit of like the stuff that I've read about am I doing now? Because there's a massive, massive difference from like doing the slow drag at the end of a night and like doing a strutting song with a lot of people watching. Like there's like, if there's anything we can learn from this book, it's like there is no one story to what Black vernacular dance is. There are many, many, many stories. And if we're going to select from them, we should at least select from them knowingly and go, okay, which bit of the stuff that I know works best in this context now?
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I think we have time for a question or two more before we move into the next part of this event. So if you have them, speak up.
Can I check? We're going till 9, correct?
Yeah, so you've got, I was thinking we have just a couple more minutes and we can just jump in.
Yeah, can we maybe take one more question?
Yeah. And if there's silence long enough, we'll just move forward. So if you want to ask a question. If you think
you want a question and you need a moment to think about it, like wave at me frantically and we'll watch you for a little minute while you think about the actual question.
I'll ask one. Oh, I've unmuted. Have I unmuted myself?
You have. Hi.
Okay, that's really mysterious because I don't remember unmuting myself, but it happened. Hi. So I found the way that you broke down those 2 stages of appropriation really interesting, because you were talking about gendered partnerships, dancing more upright, having more tone, having hips back, taking sex out. And I was like, oh, doesn't that all sound really familiar? And maybe it sounds familiar to most of this call. It sounds like how a lot of us have been taught dancing, I would imagine, particularly in the early days. And I can imagine that there are communities all over the world that you could go to that still talk about blues dancing in this way. And then I remember the first time I learned from someone like Brenda Russell, who's like, no, you don't right far back. That's a really kind of strange position to choose. And then the performative elements are also really interesting, because as we watch competitions, and we watch what is rewarded, the values represented in competitions, is it flashy tricks and moves that are rewarded, or is it that really badass moment where something's really connected in a partnership with the music and something is originating and it just works in that moment? And I think our community rewards that more, but it depends on the maturity of the community. I guess, Fen, like, we've both been part of communities in different continents at different stages of their development. We've been part of scenes as they've changed. So how do you feel that different communities manage those stages of appropriation? What drives change? And whenever, do you ever see communities, then stepping backwards, and how do we talk about this?
So I'm viscerally remembering right now when we were baby bluesers in London, going in and almost every class starting with like, and leave room for Jesus. Which I think actually, even if we were just to look at like the evolution of close embrace and how it's talked about within the blues dance community, we would have a fascinating answer to your question. Because I think there are some scenes or some geographical locations where being close to another human body is much more comfortable than it is in other locations. And there's an idea of like blues being a close embrace dance because blues is sexy. And then there's the idea of blues dance being a dance that you do, which is a really, like, it's a genuine technical form that has a lot of historical integrity, and we're going to dance it in an open connection, so we've got space for the dancing. It's not about sex at all. And then there's the stage of like, yes, but they're close embrace dances though, which is where a lot of scenes are gradually like getting to, although there's still a lot of scenes that are really, really dedicated to their blues, but culturally, close embrace is just not a thing that a lot of people coming to blues dances want to do. And that's a really difficult thing for like teachers and organizers to handle, because like in America in particular at the moment, there's been a really strong turn to blues dance idioms, and people want to do like these specific things, which includes the connection, which includes close embrace. They've also got dancers who they really want to bring into the blues community who still associate close embrace with sexy dancing and don't necessarily want sexy dancing. So I think that negotiation in particular on what we do and how we talk even just about like close embrace, it really like passes out the value of your scene. And you'll have instructors who will tell you this is a close embrace dance and you will dance in close embrace in this class. You will have instructors who will tell you this is a dance that's done in close embrace, but if you are feeling like you're only ready to do it in an open connection, do it in an open connection. And there's a ethical network around that of where people come from and what their values of like touching are and what scenes they're used to dealing with. And like, I think like it's not going to be able to be the same practice everywhere because like you said, and I think this is a really good point, different scenes are in different like stages of where they are. And different scenes have different priorities. Like there are scenes that don't necessarily want to dive down the idiom rabbit hole. And like, is that okay? Like that's a real question. Like, how do we make space for that? And dancers who don't want to go down that route, how do we make space for the people that do? And how do we introduce those different options and keep them around and talk about them and place them like historically and culturally in relationship to one another? Because I think the more clearly that we can talk about this, the more we're going to be able to shape the community not around an idea of like, this is right and this is wrong, but these are the values and this is what's important in this moment to us.
Well, thank you. That was a really great answer.
I jumped on my soapbox there for a minute, didn't I?
Well, now I think we're going to give Fen time to work with some of these dances that they've prepared. And Fen, if you want to go over a few minutes, the hour isn't like solid, we're quitting on the hour, because we did start a couple minutes after the hour.
I'm going to start the process of turning my camera around so that you can see what's going on. If any of you guys need to get up because you want to move along with me, that's fine. But this is just going to take a minute while I adjust where I need to be. It's way too far back, isn't it? Sorry, I should have prepped this in advance and known where I was going to put the camera. Can you see me all in the shot now? Perfect. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay. I'm bringing the book with me because I wanted to give you some things from the book. Hi. Can someone talk to me? I think I've lost sound.
Hello.
Hi. Perfect. Okay.
If you stand back just like even a little further than you were, like we can still see you, and then we can see your feet really clearly.
Here?
Yes, that's perfect. Then we can see your feet perfectly.
Fantastic. I want to come and talk to you for a minute first, though, so you know what we're doing. So if you look at, if you've got the book in front of you, like one of the dance that I really wanted to start off with actually is truckin', which is on plate. I should have marked this. Where'd you go? I'm sure I had you. Because truckin' is a dance that comes up quite a lot through the book. It's actually a dance that Black performers were doing, whereas a lot of these dances are actually, here it is, actually, in fact, a lot of dances as they were done by white performers, having seen Black performers. If you are reading the notation or having a look at it, please know that a lot of this notation is not great. There's one that's where one of the arms is completely flipped upside down. And it's like proofreading errors when you're writing in a language that most people don't, in fact, actually know. But, truckin'. If you want to stand up, because you'll want to do this along with me, right? Cool. So, we're starting with our feet together. And we've got an arm out in front of us like this. And we have our thumb in the air. And we're thumbing, like we're thumbing for a ride. And truckin' actually seems kind of similar to a camel walk, rhythmically, in that you're stepping forward on a foot and then sliding in. And stepping forward and sliding in. Going back a little so you can see my feet better. So you've got to step forward. As you slide in, you're creating the slide in by rotating the leg that you just stepped onto. So you've got to step and tuck and step and tuck and thumb and thumb and thumb and thumb. The layer that's missing to that is that every time you twist onto the foot, what you're going to do is you are tucking your pelvis under. So like you shunt your butt forward. So you've got a step and tuck and step and tuck and step and tuck and step and tuck. So you've got a kind of forwards and backwards body motion that's coming from your butt. Does that make sense? I've got two people trucking with me. I don't know if Amy's trucking with me. Let's all do it together. Let's go 5, 6, 7, 8, and tuck and step and step and tuck and step and tuck. Cool, we learned how to truck. Cool, so I actually wondered, do any of you guys who have looked at this book have requests? A request for a thing that you'd like me to read the notation of and show you?
Feel free to unmute your microphone and ask.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I can't find my book, so I can't actually just tell you which one.
Okay.
Sorry.
Because I picked out truckin' as one that was really clear to me, and I wonder if there's any that you guys would really like to know, or any that came up in the book that you'd like to see if I can do.
Fen, I have one, but I left my book in the other room, so I'm gonna run up and grab it and then like.
If you remember the name, I can look it up in the index.
Oh yeah. I have it marked, but for the life of me, I don't remember the name.
Okay, go off and get it. We'll do that thing.
All right.
There are some that are really easy, that are quite easy to get out of the book, like chugs. Chugs are on plate 5, if anyone's following me along, which is to stand with your feet apart, and your body upright, and shunt yourself forward. Like some of these you've really seen on the dance floor before. I was trying to pick out ones that were like interesting and yet still within like a vernacular tradition and like were feasible. I don't know, like Around the World falls down on the floor, which I figured none of you would really be up for.
I mean, it might be kind of cool to see some of the ones that we kind of like, we know, right? But how it's translated here, like the cakewalk.
Absolutely.
Right?
Actually, the cakewalk I can do really kind of easily because it's up on my blog as one that I did restaged from notation a while ago, and I wrote a little essay about like the politics of restaging a cakewalk. This is like, it's very strange to do the cakewalk as a step rather than as a social phenomenon, and it's very much a step here. Do you have the page for it? I'm looking for it.
It looks like it's on 13, plate 13.
Yeah. Okay, yes, I can absolutely do that. Funny fact, like the cakewalk became so like appropriated. If you look in Meet Me in St. Louis, Julie Garland does a cakewalk with like an 8-year-old girl. It's really quite something. Okay, so the cakewalk. It's best if I show you sideways on. And okay. Your body's rocking forwards and backwards. You're going to jump onto a bent leg with your leg up behind you. And then you're going to raise up onto the ball of your foot and you're going to kick your leg as high as you can in the air. Like it's actually saying get it like to 45, 90 to 45 degrees above 90. And it has you doing that. The arms that they've got going on are like fists and then reaching to the leg. And you're actually twisting towards the leg that's in the air. Towards the legs in the air? Yeah, I didn't mind. Yeah, and that is how the Stearns think you do the cakewalk.
Thank you.
Chelsea, did you find your book?
I did.
What was the book you wanted?
I was particularly interested that Stearns has talked about it a lot, is The Itch, and it's on plate 7.
Itch on plate 7, yeah, okay.
It reminded me somewhat of like Shimmy or Shake or like Shiver, but it seemed like it was far more complex in the way it was described.
Yeah, the itch in this book I've looked at before, it's really disappointing. Writing down what a torso is doing is one of the hardest things to notate. I have someone coming off in the elevator. Hi, so the itch in this book, you start with your legs apart, but you're on the balls of your feet, so you're on tiptoe. And you're hopping kind of sporadically from one foot to the other. And it doesn't say ad-lib, but I'm kind of making it ad-lib because as the way the Stearns talk about it, it's very much responsive to the music and it's very much a rhythmic play rather than a pattern. So I'm going to tell you to ad-lib that. When you hop on one leg, you have the other leg up sideways. And you stay on the balls of your feet, which I think gives it a sense of instability. They actually have a set pattern that your right arm slaps your left shoulder. Your left hand slaps your hip, and then your shoulder, and you carry on slapping different parts of yourself. I don't think the parts of you are necessarily specific, but the point, putting together what I read in the book with the movement here is like, to make a rhythm out of jumping and slapping.
Cool, that's a lot of fun.
That's very much as it's written rather than a thing I know in practice. Like,
yeah,
it definitely
sounds like, based on the notation, different than it is described in the book as I read.
So what does it say about the itch in the book? Let's find it. Because look, this is the kind of research that happens. Itch 24 and 27. Let's go and have a look. That's not the description. Yeah, like went round and round in a circle, arms crossed from time to time, over his chest, the fingers tugging at clothing, like scratching to relieve an itching sensation. And none of that is in the notation.
Mm-hmm.
Like the notation is sticking to slapping. But if we understand it as kind of like part of maybe eccentric dancing, and you put it together with a notation, then we start to get an idea of how it might work in context.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Does somebody else have a move they want, or should I suggest another one?
I think we've got time for one more. Amy asked for the cakewalk while you're gone. Anna, do you have one that you'd like?
Anna, you're still muted, so you want to unmute your microphone.
Or you can type. There you go.
I think I've unmuted. Yes.
Yes.
There's quite a few that I'd be interested in seeing, actually. The ones that I'm familiar with, I'd be interested in seeing whether they're notated in the same way as I've been taught them.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also ones that I don't think that I know what they're supposed to look like. There's a couple on plate 13 around there's a rooster strut, a strut step, a mummer strut. There's all these different kind of struts or walks.
Yeah, maybe pick one?
Yes. I'm going to go with pirate, because pirate.
Pirate, great. The pirates walk in the bottom right-hand corner?
Yeah.
Great, let's have a look at that one. So, sorry, this is one I haven't really looked at a whole lot, so I'm going to take a minute to read it. You're starting with your feet together, and the first thing you're doing is walking forward heel-toe. You're rising up on the ball of your foot. I'm picking your, you're walking like your left leg is wooden. So you have to, you have to walk forward and fall. That would be perfect, as they've got it written down. Great. So I think with our wonderful pirate, that might be where we leave it today. Thank you so much for sitting and listening and like asking wonderful questions and making me do things. Chelsea, is there anything you'd like to say to kind of round things up?
Suppose thank you for attending. We appreciate that you take time out of your day, whether that's at 1 a.m. or 8 in the morning, or the evening with us here in the States, to really like engage with these books and dances. I'd like to thank Fen for taking time to prepare a lecture and to deal with some of these notations in the back of the book, which I think most of us are incapable of reading. Like, we don't have the tools to read these. So I really appreciate that you would take the time to do this. So we hope you will stay tuned for our next lecture, which will hopefully be coming up in either late December or early January. And thanks again, Fen.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, both of you.
All right. We're going to stop the broadcast now. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.